They laughed when the heavy diesel bulldozers pulled up to the property line, their engines rumbling like a mechanical thunderstorm ready to tear the earth apart. Marcus Thorne, a 32-year-old vice president of acquisitions for Vanguard Logistics, stepped out of his sleek midnight black SUV. He adjusted his tailored Italian suit, completely oblivious to the cold, biting November wind sweeping across the Tennessee Valley. He looked at the weathered, 76-year-old farmer standing quietly on the porch, not as a man, but as a minor clerical error standing in the way of a $100 million distribution center. Thorne smirked, holding up a glowing silver tablet. He confidently announced that according to the state's digital registry, a forgotten lien from 1972 gave the corporation the absolute right of eminent domain over the exact center of the farm. He gave the old man 48 hours to vacate the ancestral home, or the bulldozers would do it for him. Thorne thought it was over. He thought the system always wins. But he had no idea that the quiet man on the porch was holding a secret that would not only stop the bulldozers in their tracks, but would cost Vanguard Logistics millions of dollars. If you believe that a man's honest word and a hard day's work still means something in this modern world, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. We tell the stories of the quiet giants who refuse to be broken by corporate greed. To understand the sheer magnitude of what Marcus Thorne was trying to destroy, you have to look at the hands of Arthur Pendleton. They were not just hands. They were a living map of the land itself. The skin was thick, scarred, and heavily calloused, resembling the rough, unyielding bark of the ancient white oaks that lined his driveway. Arthur remembered the exact taste of the metallic, dry dust during the brutal drought of 1988. He remembered the bone-rattling sound of his tractor's transmission dropping out at 3 in the morning, and how he had to fix it by the light of a single, flickering kerosene lantern because the winter frost was coming, and the harvest wouldn't wait. Arthur had purchased these 140 acres on a brisk morning, October 14, 1968. Back then, it was nothing but wild brush and jagged stones. He and his late wife, Martha, cleared the lower 40 acres by hand. You could still see the stone walls they built, rock by rock, their fingers bleeding, their backs aching, bound together by a silent promise to build a legacy that would outlast them both.
This farm wasn't just an asset on a spreadsheet, and it certainly wasn't a vacant lot waiting for a concrete warehouse. This was the exact spot where Arthur had taught his daughter how to ride a bicycle. It was the living room with the slightly uneven oak floorboards where Martha had taken her final breath after a long battle with illness. It was the soil that held the sweat of his youth and the tears of his old age. Martha had been the meticulous one. Every night, after washing the dishes, she would sit at the heavy mahogany dining table, open her leather-bound ledgers, and track every single penny. She kept every receipt, every bank statement, every handwritten note from the local suppliers. In today's world, success is measured in terabytes of cloud storage, algorithms, and quarterly profit margins. But Arthur was a man forged in a different era. He was a man whose handshake was a binding contract and whose word was as solid as the bedrock beneath his boots. The nightmare began exactly 3 weeks before the bulldozers arrived. Vanguard Logistics had been quietly buying up the surrounding properties, bullying struggling families into selling for pennies on the dollar to build a massive automated shipping hub. Arthur was the last holdout. When Thorne first visited, he didn't even bother to wipe his expensive leather shoes on the welcome mat. He walked straight into Arthur's kitchen, bringing the smell of expensive cologne that clashed violently with the comforting scent of Arthur's brewing black coffee and wood smoke. Thorne tapped his tablet, showing a digital overlay of the valley. He explained, with a tone of overwhelming condescension,
that a digital audit revealed an unpaid utility right-of-way lien from the county dating back to 1972. Because it was never cleared in the digital database, a forgotten eminent domain clause had been triggered. Vanguard had purchased the municipal debt, and therefore they owned the right to bisect Arthur's property, effectively seizing the house, the barn, and the water source. Thorne offered a hollow smile, leaning against the doorframe. He told Arthur that he was being generous. He offered a check for $40,000 as a, quote, zero, provided Arthur signed a quitclaim deed right then and there. If not, Thorne promised that Vanguard's army of corporate lawyers would drown the old man in litigation, drain his meager savings, and take the land anyway, leaving him with absolutely nothing. Thorne spoke with the absolute certainty of a man who had never lost. In his world, the digital stream was the ultimate truth. If the cloud servers said Arthur didn't own the land, then the reality of 50 years of blood and sweat simply did not exist.
But it wasn't just a ledger. Neatly tucked inside the front cover was a heavy, folded parchment document, sealed with a faded red wax stamp. It was the original deed of trust, dated October 14, 1968. Arthur unfolded it carefully. There, on the third page, was a handwritten addendum, countersigned by the original county judge and the founder of the local bank. Arthur read the words in the dim light, and a slow, fierce fire ignited in his chest. He hadn't just found a document. He had found his shield. He had found the weapon that would bring Vanguard Logistics to its knees. 2 days later, the county courthouse was buzzing with nervous energy. The courtroom smelled of lemon polish and old paper. Marcus Thorne sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by 4 expensive corporate litigators. They had their sleek laptops open, projecting a massive digital map of Arthur's farm onto a screen, showing the proposed distribution center crushing the old farmhouse. Thorne was practically glowing with smug arrogance, casually checking his gold watch, eager to finalize the eviction and get back to the city. Arthur sat alone at the defendant's table. He wore his best Sunday suit, a dark wool jacket that was a little too loose on his aging frame, his hands resting quietly on his lap. The presiding judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes and 30 years on the bench, called the room to order. She looked down at Arthur with a mixture of pity and professional detachment. Thorne's lead attorney stood up and delivered a polished 20-minute presentation. He spoke of progress, economic development, and the indisputable accuracy of the state's digital registry. He concluded that Mr. Pendleton had no legal standing, no proof to contradict the digital lien, and that the eviction must proceed immediately for the public good. "Mr. Pendleton," the judge said softly, her voice echoing in the silent room, "the plaintiff has presented a certified digital record of the encumbrance. Do you have any physical evidence, any documentation whatsoever to dispute their claim today?" Arthur stood up slowly. He didn't rush. He walked toward the judge's bench with the heavy, deliberate steps of a man who had walked behind a plow for 50 years. He reached into his worn leather satchel and pulled out the green ledger, placing it gently on the wooden railing. Then he produced the heavy parchment document with the red wax seal. "Your Honor," Arthur said, his voice surprisingly deep and completely unshaken. "The men in the expensive suits are right about one thing. There was a lien on that property. But if their computers had a memory longer than yesterday, they would know it was paid in full, in cash, on November 2nd, 1982. And my wife, God rest her soul, made sure the county judge signed off on this original deed." He handed the parchment to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. The courtroom was dead silent. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner.
The judge adjusted her glasses and read the document. Her eyes widened, and then a sharp, dangerous look crossed her face as she glared over her glasses at Marcus Thorne.
"Mr. Thorne," the judge said, her voice dripping with ice, "are you aware of the contents of this original, notarized, and state-sealed addendum from 1968? Thorne stood up, his smug smile faltering. "Your Honor, any paper document is superseded by the digital registry. It's standard procedure—" "Quiet!" the judge snapped, slamming her hand on the desk. "This specific addendum, signed by the founding magistrate of this county, explicitly states that upon the final payoff of the property, not only are all previous easements and liens permanently null and void, but any future attempt by a commercial entity to seize this land under false pretenses triggers an automatic, non-negotiable penalty." The judge looked back at the paper, her voice ringing through the room. "A penalty payable to the landowner, equating to 20 times the assessed commercial value of the encroaching development." All the color drained from Marcus Thorne's face. The corporate lawyers next to him froze, their fingers hovering motionless over their keyboards. The silence in the room was absolute, deafening in its intensity. Quote 12, the judge continued, her tone merciless. Quote 13. The judge picked up her wooden gavel. Quote 14. The crack of the gavel sounded like a gunshot. Thorne collapsed into his chair, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a cheap costume. He buried his face in his hands, completely and utterly destroyed. Arthur didn't gloat. He hadn't immediately planned how to spend the millions. Tomorrow morning, he would wake up before the sun, put on his boots, and go fix the fence in the lower pasture, exactly as he had done for half a century. The modern world tries to tell us that everything can be quantified, digitized, and erased with the push of a button. The corporations and the men in the expensive suits believe that if something isn't on a screen, it doesn't exist. They rely on their wealth and their technology to intimidate and conquer. But they forget the unbreakable power of history. They forget that you cannot digitize the sweat of an honest man, and you cannot delete a promise sealed in ink and blood. Truth, just like the deep roots of the ancient oak trees on Arthur's farm, always remains anchored exactly where it belongs. If you found value in this story of true justice, please subscribe to the channel, share this video, and tell us in the comments what you would have done in Arthur's shoes. Keep standing your ground, and we'll see you in the next story.